current and former Black women officers are suing the DC Police Department, claiming racial and sexual discrimination. They're among them about 10 who are still on the force, saying that as they started to file professional complaints, there was a ton of retaliation. An assistant chief of police is among these women who are filing this class action lawsuit, as well as lieutenants and sergeants totaling more than 300 years of experience. And not only are they seeking $100 million in damages, but they're also looking for the department to fix its EEO department and other divisions that handle these complaints. Then it is interesting to see women, Black women who are in the police force, stepping up and saying, we're no longer going to tolerate this discrimination. But what I can't help but think about is the many officers and, the few chiefs that I've spoken to who say that they're prioritizing diversity, especially after George Floyd. And here you have 10 Black women who are working on this force and saying that they have created a culture that does not include them.
Well, yes. I think that should be an understatement. Not only is this system not going to be representative of Black women, it's not going to be a system that's conducive or protective of Black women, because we're talking about policing agencies across this country. Now, this does not undermine the legitimacy and the validity of this lawsuit, right? Because right is right and wrong is wrong. If this empire told us that we're going to be equal, then they're going to have to do more than just diversity and inclusion kind of overtures. They're going to have to actually live up to their promise.
And I've had the opportunity to speak with quite a few Black officers. One thing I've learned in those conversations is just how complex that identity is. Can you imagine being a Black officer out at a Black Lives Matter protest and feeling torn? I've had officers tell me that there are times when they're patrolling these protests when they really want to be on the other side, when they feel drawn to their humanity, to their Blackness. And so to walk that fine line of being Black and blue, especially in this era, it is extremely complex. But to know that you have Black women who have committed to trying to make change from the inside out, who are being discriminated against. And when they're stepping up and saying, hey, there's something not right about the culture we have here, when they're speaking up, then they're being retaliated against. And so while you have so many people who have said, we just need to reform these police departments, this is a part of that reform that people are talking about. But the question is, this is just in DC, and we know based on the investigations that have been launched by the Department of Justice, it's not just DC that's having these issues. But is this class action lawsuit really going to result in the reform that's needed to transform the culture in these police departments?
I don't think that it will be, but I am perfectly okay with the police department having to pay up. So while this may not change anything, I do think that they need to cut some checks because they have been well funded across every single city across this country. They are the most funded department in any city, period. Hands down. And so if they are now also out there continuing to carry out their original agenda, which was anti-Black, then they're going to have to pay for that. So run these distinguished women their money.
We have the mayor who has not commented on this class action lawsuit, as well as the current administration in that police department, basically saying because there is this pending lawsuit, they can't comment. So we probably won't hear from officials on this. But when you have that many officers, not just one, but 10 Black women suing for $100 million, it probably is likely that they're going to win. Lawyers would not take on a class action lawsuit like this unless there's substantial evidence to help them win their lawsuit. And so it will be interesting. I do intend to follow this class action lawsuit to see what type of evidence is presented in court, what instances have happened over the last 20 years. Some of these women have worked for this police department. What have they had to endure to substantiate these claims of both race and sexual discrimination? It is unfortunate that here we are in 2021, not only as a Black woman going into the workforce being discriminated against because you're Black, but also because you're a woman. So, it is just... Georgia, but I'm not surprised, Ben. Not surprised.
Georgia, to that point, let's be clear. If they're trying to find evidence of anti-Blackness in the policing agency, I can't wait for the discovery period, the discovery phase. If they're trying to find anti-woman problems in the policing agency, I don't think that's going to be a problem, because we have to understand these are not some amoral institutions that these white men and, there's other people there, but let's predominantly white men get into this profession and we expect them to somehow all of a sudden relinquish all of their biases and their bigotry and their sexism and their racism and leave it behind the badge. But it's still there every time they stop us. So much so that as Black officers have an issue with being unable to stand with Black Lives Matter in those moments, you have to understand that these white policing institutions stand behind the Proud Boys and stand in front of them and protect them. So that's a dilemma that white police officers don't have.
Well, to that point, Ben, I would be curious if any of the evidence that's going to be presented in this class action lawsuit is going to be from January 6th. Because this is the DC Police Department. And so how many of these Black women came across images of their colleagues taking photographs with those who were attacking our Capitol on January 6th? You got to remember, this is that same police department. And so it is also a result of what happened that day. I think those officers, we know some of them allowed folks to go in, opened up doors for them, took photos with them, participated, contributed to the attack on our Capitol. And to know that you had Black women who were upholding their oath, who were being good colleagues, having to deal with people who have those thoughts and those perspectives that type of behavior at our Capitol is okay.
Yeah. And Georgia, that's 100% the case, right? And so we have to be sure that we understand very, very clearly that the policing institutions across this country were never meant to serve marginalized groups. That includes, and especially includes, Black people, but most specifically Black women. And so I certainly hope that they have the best attorneys here. I don't think that this is going to change anything structurally, but like I said before, run these distinguished women their money.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, I know that you've been following some stories this morning as well.
Yes, we're following out of Florida the absurdity that is Governor Desantis. While we have been negotiating with ridiculousness throughout this pandemic, and this is what I mean very specifically, we can't even get kids to wear masks in school because governors like Desantis, he's making it impossible. Well, in this case, we're dealing with the last line of defense during this pandemic, which is quarantining someone who has either been infected by the virus or been exposed to the virus. And now Governor Desantis says, hold on. Don't think for a second that you have the right to ask a student who is infected with COVID-19 to actually quarantine. Listen to this absurdity that is Governor Desantis.
To take them out of school, that's a huge burden on the student. It's a huge burden on the families as well. And I think we've seen, as the doctor mentioned, you haven't seen a lot of data or studies to justify those types of draconian actions. And the places that have done a symptoms-based approach have had very similar outcomes to places that have done more draconian quarantine.
So he's referring to mandatory quarantines of infected or exposed students. And of course, we do know this is going to extend beyond just the students in school. This is going to be an argument made for anyone who's been infected. But now, Georgia, we can't wear masks. We can't mandate masks. We cannot mandate the vaccine. We cannot make our places of business require vaccines. But now we can't even ask people who are infected or have been exposed to quarantine, because that would be draconian to Ron Desantis of the state of Florida.
Every single decision that I have seen DeSantis make with regards to COVID-19 has resulted in more people losing their lives. And so I don't know at what point the people of Florida are going to stand up and protect their families, protect their children, but it is ridiculous that this governor has the power to continuously make these decisions. And even here, we were just talking a group of parents about the protocols in the schools here in Minnesota. And so if you sneeze, they're sending you home. And in some instances, they're sending the entire class home. And while, yes, it may be an inconvenience, it has resulted in safer classrooms for not only students, but also the educators. And so when this is all said and done, I think DeSantis is going to have to answer to a lot of families. Right. And not just the children, but I think about that first week. There were 4 teachers who died going into those classrooms because he refused to mandate masks. And he's continuing to dismiss the health and safety of everybody who's walking into schools each and every day.
And the only thing that I could add to that, Georgia, because that's 100% correct, is that while it looks to us as if Ron DeSantis is being irrational and being unreasonable, he is literally carrying out his assignment, along with Tate Reeves of Mississippi, along with Brian Kemp of Georgia, along with Greg Abbott of Georgia, of Texas. We have Republican governors across this country who are aligned with this anti-vax / anti-mask movement. But here's the thing. The best way for us to understand this is that there are people in leadership who have been assigned to exacerbate this pandemic, because everything else makes no sense. Or rather, if we look at it through that lens, every one of these decisions makes sense. Because is it not the case that all of these governors are literally making the decisions that are going to maximize the amount of death and carnage from this pandemic? And because that is the outcome, we must conclude that is their intention, and we see them.
Yeah. And when you think about it also, Ben, it's like, well, who do you represent? Because if the people of Florida are okay with DeSantis saying, we don't have to have masks in school, we don't have to quarantine when someone's been exposed. If people aren't at his office demanding more from him, then obviously he is representing the views and the perspectives of his constituents, right? Mm-hmm. And when you reflect back to January 6th, maybe we're the outliers here. Maybe we're the few in the nation who feel like our children should be kept safe, that the science that has been brought forth by the CDC to protect them and to prevent them from contracting COVID-19 and dying, right? Maybe we're the outliers. Maybe he is representing the views and the thoughts of the parents who go to a school. It's just hard to believe that even the amount of teachers who have died here really believe and respect the decisions that he's making. When lives are at stake, it's really hard to think that there are constituents in the state of Florida who are okay with the decisions he's making, and in fact are happy and pleased. But what I realized, Ben, is even with the radio personality, the radio host, all of these prominent figures who have spent the last 2 years countering every single thing that the CDC has put out. What I have realized is what it truly takes for these people to get it is for them to get COVID-19.
Yeah. And in so many cases, they die. They have been committed to their ignorance, even unto death. And they are casualties. You know, they're calculated losses that white supremacy is willing to make, white supremacy and greed, because let's be clear, at the core of this is the fact that there are people who refuse to see a decrease in their quarterly profit margins, even if it costs us 1 million American lives. And so there is the greed incentive that's involved here, but underlying all of this is the amount of clear, intentional obtuseness and ignorance that these governors are feigning, but we see them. We know that you are out here serving your masters and you don't mind executing your constituents on their behalf.
This is going to be the most historic era in this country, because now that COVID-19 has surpassed the amount of deaths that our country saw during, 1918 Spanish flu, you pair that with the largest protest in American history, in global history, right? So when you start to add all of these things together, the sad thing is we're supposed to have better technology. We're supposed to have, more developed scientists and all of these different factors, all of these different things that were at our disposal to get it right. Yet here we are in the deadliest pandemic in American history.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I oftentimes beg people to really take a step back and look at this from a 30,000 foot, and you would realize what you said is 100% true, Georgia. This is a period in, I believe, world history that is going to be, it's an inflection point. Whether or not we have a future is dependent upon whether or not we allow these bad faith actors to continue to hold complete control over our society. We have sociopaths at the helm of the ship of humanity. And we see that they are faithful even unto death, but not necessarily their deaths, because I bet you that the people who are benefiting from the number of deaths that are increasing from COVID-19, I guarantee you they have their vaccine. I guarantee you have to wear a mask around them, and I bet you have to quarantine. But Ron Desantis is saying, no, not in the state of Florida, you won't.
No, Ben, I know there have been a couple of other stories that you've been following this morning as well.
Yeah, there is a concerted effort, Georgia, around this country to really run up the scoreboard on behalf of white supremacy. I want to play this clip from Tucker Carlson as he discusses what's happening at the border. And I want us to be sure all of these things are interconnected. There may be at times debates amongst black people about something people may call the diaspora wars. But I want us to be sure every single person that is the child of the diaspora, we face a level of bigotry that is intentional about the dehumanization of black people across the globe. Here is the latest iteration of it as Tucker Carlson attacks, and his guest attacks, the people who are at the border seeking asylum that are being treated like animals by the United States government. Let's take a listen in.
These are economic migrants. They're rich enough for a plane ticket and a smartphone, but they're eager for the free health care, the education, the housing vouchers, food stamps, and much more that Joe Biden has promised them if they make it to the United States. So, of course, they're coming from Haiti and from the rest of the world. You would, too. They'd be crazy not to come. The Biden administration plans to give them voting rights. That's in the works right now. The people you just saw on your screen could very well be choosing your president at some point down the road. This is a manufactured crisis. This is an attempt to change the demographics of the United States in order to give permanent power to the Democratic Party. That's all it is, no matter what they tell you.
The border is wide open. They've seen people crossing there for months. The Biden administration doesn't do anything, and this is their chance. So they said their lives are pretty good. I've seen many of them in the airports here as They're cycled through and distributed all over this country. They're well dressed and, very lovely people from what I can tell, well behaved, great families. What they don't look like is desperate. They don't look like, for example, Christians fleeing persecution from Nigeria who are actually in the midst of a genocide, who cannot even get asylum. The asylum laws are actually written for them. You know what the agents tell me? Several hundred of them, like around 300, escaped on Sunday morning. They just ran away. The conditions are miserable. They don't have enough food. They don't have any real facilities or security. It is an absolute unmitigated disaster. All those people in the Biden administration that came from the Open Society Foundation that we're not allowed to talk about, they don't want a border, which means no America, right? No countries. That's why patriotism and the flag and all of those things are so evil today, right? They're automatically white supremacy and nationalism. Never mind that you can be, an African country and be proud of your flag and your borders, or you can come from Kosovo. What you're seeing is part of a much bigger political picture.
Oh, that last part is absolutely correct. What you see is a part of a much bigger political picture. The second voice was that of Laura Logan. She was a guest on the Tucker Carlson program as they discussed the lack of desperation in the eyes of the asylum seekers at the border, Georgia. I think what they want is something analogous to the Game of Thrones, or rather Hunger Games. They want to see the desperation in the eyes of the Haitian people. But I happen to know quite a few Haitians, and their pride runs deep. You're not going to break them. White supremacy is nothing for them.
I thought it was interesting. Out of all of the images that circulated, Kamala Harris finally used her position to speak out. And I think the one thing I was disappointed about is the fact that it took something so extreme for her to speak up on behalf of Black people. And when you have Tucker Carlson and Laura, or should I say Karen, going out here and continuing to dehumanize our people. Let's be clear. America is a melting pot of immigrants from all over this world. And it absolutely disgusts me when you see all of these white leaders using their power, their influence, their social capital to try and say why we shouldn't allow more immigrants into this country. Right. If we were a country that cracked that far down on allowing people to come into this country, none of us would be here. That's right. None of us, except for the indigenous community.
That's right. Right. And then those of us who were forcibly brought here by those same colonizers that devastated the indigenous populations, right? There's a level of culpability that goes from the beginning of this country, even before 1776, perhaps all the way back to 1619. There's a level of culpability that the system has for all of this. And I would suggest that the last thing that we're going to do as Black people is to allow white supremacy to attack our cousins who were simply sent in a different direction on a different ship, but all of us torn from our same motherland. So I'm sorry for anyone who might be caught up with whether or not we should be fighting on behalf of Black immigrants. They Black, and I'm rooting for everybody Black.
Absolutely. Or you want to start talking about colonizers, the colonizers who have been going to Haiti or other countries, depleting it of its natural resources, leaving the people with nothing, and then want to act surprised when they show up at our doorstep because we've taken everything from their country and we've left them with absolutely nothing. It continues to happen throughout Africa. You have these white-owned corporations who are going into different countries across the globe, depleting it of its natural resources, paying pennies on the dollar and coming here and making millions. And then wonder why these countries remain underdeveloped.
I'm not sure who said this, but one of my comrades said the global South isn't underdeveloped, it's overexploited. Because there's so many, the riches that we enjoy in this country right now, every technology gets its resources from the global South, particularly in African nations. Let's be clear, right? If the wealth of this world was actually in the hands of the people underneath the ground from whence it came, White supremacy, I tell you, it's not so supreme after all. Georgia, we might need to get off this topic because they're playing with some stuff here, because it really, really does dig deep down into the question of our roots, right? Because if you mentioned it, like this is a melting pot, but black people have been here longer than most white people. Our generations go back much longer, right? The average white person in this country has been here maybe 3-4 generations, right? But black folks, because we were removed from our homeland, were brought here forcibly, and we've been here since before the founding. So, yeah, when we fight this fight on behalf of the Haitian asylum seekers at the border, they are asylum seekers who left Haiti in 2010. I want to make sure that we're clear, Tucker Carlson. They left Haiti in 2010 as a result of the earthquake and the mass displacement. And they found themselves in places like Chile, from whence they were able to come to the United States upon somebody's notification. One other thing I have to put in here. Somebody did tell all of these people that they should come to the border. That's who we need to ask where that person and that group are, because I tell you one thing, this is the exact type of red meat that conservatives love and live for. And I do not put it past a single one of them to have orchestrated this entire thing from the beginning.
Well, I want to know why they decided what went into the editorial decision to not use the images with the whips. Why didn't they use those pictures? Why didn't they use that video? Did you notice that?
Because they know because then they absolutely draw solidarity between the children of the diaspora, because you cannot look at an image of a white animal sitting atop a horse whipping a Haitian brother or sister and not see that all of us are survivors of either slavery or colonialism. And they know those images unify us. So they might want to make sure those images don't get out.
Yeah, I was like, wait, isn't this the same situation? Or aren't we talking about the same situation? Because when you turn on any other media outlet, this was the topic of conversation. But they didn't want to utilize these images to humanize the people of Haiti. And how do you defend that? How do you and it's so reminiscent of slavery. When I saw these images, and I think that's what struck a chord with Kamala, right? But it shouldn't take a white man whipping a black brother for you to stand up for your people and use your political and social capital on our behalf. That's what you were elected to do. It shouldn't take that. So although I'm glad that Kamala spoke up about how this was wrong and she denounced it, I'm disappointed that it had to be such a severe situation for her to speak up for our people.
And isn't that the case right now? Because if we ask ourselves the question, this country did not keep its promise after George Floyd, then what is it going to take for us to get the next inch in this fight for justice? How extreme does the next video have to be?
I guess we're going to have to be out here picking cotton before somebody's going to do something.
But for the record, let anybody come around here with a whip around anybody. I don't care if they are from Haiti, Jamaica, Nigeria. Bring a whip around a black person, and you don't. Georgia, I got to correct something. There was a black brother in that video, too. Somebody with a lot of melanin, and they did nothing but watch that white man whip our brothers. If you are in the presence of that tomfoolery and you don't go full Django Unchained, the ancestors would like to have a word with you, my friend.
Well, we are on the clock. Ben, what can people expect coming up in the next half hour?
Georgia, I don't know. You done awoken a lot of stuff in me this morning. All I can say is if y'all can stick around until after this break, we are going to let loose on all of these lies, from right-wing evangelical pastors to these propagandists on Fox News. All of that is coming up in the next half hour.
That and more on The Benjamin Dixon Show.